Hi guys. Today we're going to talk a little bit about Squarebill crankbaits. It's been a few days since I've had time to post, but I've been thinking about some creative ways to share some information and get some knowledge out there. Also I've been in LA for a couple days. So anyway, I just want to talk about Squarebill crankbaits today. I think you know that's one of the most important techniques that I use. I know, especially on Lake Waco, kind of closer between Austin and Dallas. It's a little more flat out there. It's more of a farmland type um, setup, and I don't know if you'd say topography. It's more of a farmland landscape, and so fish set up a lot shallower throughout the year, and whether it's a spawn situation, post spawn situation, um, even into early summer, and then of course fall. With the exceptions being late summer and winter, when the fish get on the farthest outside tree lines and closest to the deepest water. I can get away with fishing, squarebills, especially when the fish are active or there's wind blowing or there's a drop in barometric pressure or something that stimulates fish to feed and opens up their strike window a little bit. That's when I'll go to a moving bait like a squarebill. And what's nice is in comparison to something like a spinner bait, like if you were trying to mimic a shad and you had a spinner bait as well as a squarebill, the spinnerbait pushes more water and creates a larger profile in the water than does your squarebill. So a lot of times, unless it's muddy and you're really trying to build a bigger image in the water and cast a bigger shadow, I guess, um, it's nice to throw something like a squarebill because there's a finesse aspect to it, where it's more of a subtle kind of action. There's different types of squarebills, of course, where there's a wider body and it has a tendency to hunt more side to side. And then there's the narrow where it's just kind of more of a tight. I don't know how to explain that, uh, but anyway, so I think, of course, I just want to point out that on one of my previous videos that I had just made on crankbait fishing, um, I kind of showed what I had, what's standard for where I carry, what I carry, and um, you know my methods behind what I select for what conditions, etc. And I kind of categorize like separately general crankbait fishing and squarebill fishing. I think they're two different things. That's just my way of keeping everything organized in my mind. But um, this is what I have. Kind of, this is my setup, and I have everything, kind of in the same way as I had my crankbaits, my traditional crankbaits, kind of divided. I have everything split up by species, and in color type. I just keep everything really easy. And I had mentioned in my previous videos that the systems that you employ in your bass fishing, or really anything that you do, any discipline, are so key to being successful. So I have these systems and programs that I utilize in order to stay organized and to be more efficient in my procedures on the water. It makes a huge difference, and it's a uh, guaranteed. All the top pros behave in the same way. They just, there's limited time, and your mind's all over the map whenever you're fishing competitively or taking clients out or whatever. So you have to be well prepared. But but I do want to talk about colors first. I think that's where I'm going to start, is colors. And one of my favorite colors is like this brown craw. And what I like about this brown craw is that I found this in the late fall period on Lake Waco. I was drifting on my kayak, and I ran across a patch of rocks, and I saw one of the crawfish dart out from those rocks, and I saw what color they were, and then I went to Academy, and it was identical to this, identical in every way, every way. There's a little darker back. The sides were pretty light. This was the color. So I picked it up and started throwing it in a silent version, thinking that the silent had a little bit more subtlety, and because of how much tournament fishing pressure Lake Waco receives for how small of a body of water it is, it made sense to me to throw the silent. And it paid off. It's been one of the best techniques that I've ever used out there, and it's every season around the same time I catch them doing that. So I guess it's just the time of year and the bottom composition that's associated with where they're living that makes them that color. But it's also got, it's hard to see on the camera, but it's also got a little bit of a very faint green hue on the top. It's dark, but it's like almost a green pumpkin type coloration on the top, and I think that's another reason why it's so good. So, you know, specifically during that time of the year, that late fall, even on into winter, that color is super, super good. In like your moderate stain, you know, nothing too dark. Pretty clear, actually, for at least Lake Waco. Fire Tiger is one of the colors that I started throwing that I used to hate. I just didn't have any confidence in it, but it's super good. It could be really, really good. There's no difference between it and sort of a parrot type color, just because it's just all about presence and being seen in stained water. So if it's, you know, any type of situation where I feel like they're feeding heavily on perch, or there's just a good population of perch in the area, or, you know, it's just the nature of the watercolors is so dingy that you have to throw something that has some presence or some flashiness, I'll throw this. Just for my own confidence purposes, knowing whether they're eating shad or perch or crawfish makes a big difference in just me being confident. If I know that they're on shad, you know, I could throw a really bright white type Squarebill. Whereas if I know that they're on perch, I could throw like a clown or a fire tiger or something like that, both of which will stand out in the water. And, you know, they could be feeding on shad and you can catch them on this just because of the stain. It's, you know, but it gives me more confidence that I feel like there's real merit to understanding that you could just brighten up the family of forage that you're in. You know, if it's that perch color, to go really bright with it, with those primary colors of the perch, you know, and fish it that way, if that makes sense. It's not just like, hey, pick a bright color. You can get away with it more so in dirty water than you can in clear. I think they're more finicky and selective with their color preferences than they are in dirty water, but I just feel like that extra bit of confidence that it brings me is super worth it. And I feel like, you know, I can get a few more bites, and also the right bites from mature fish that, you know, have been around a little bit longer, by switching up to something that really mimics what they're on. So Fire Tiger, I've kind of built some confidence in it lately. I feel like it's a really great bait. Also, I throw a yellow black. This is just kind of a traditional year-round color. I started throwing it a few years ago and got the idea from watching it was a, you know, Pro Techniques type video, classic patterns, and the guy was throwing this yellow and black on some rocks, and it was a stained water situation. It was wintertime, and, you know, he was catching them on this. And that kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier. You know, it could have been that the fish were keyed in more on craws than they were on perch, but for whatever reason, he was getting bit on this, and so he kept throwing it, and it worked. And it's just one of those go-to colors, you know, for those cold water months whenever they get real active on the rocks and pursuing fish kind of, or pursuing, you know, forage up shallow. So that's one of the colors that I'll throw, especially if it's, you know, a good stain to the water. It needs to be a pretty good stain for me to whip out the yellow and black. You know, it's pretty much the basic same color group as this one here, and same color group as the Fire Tiger. that I pulled out. They're all kind of in that same family. So to me, if I just making sense of it, that's all in that, you know, sunfish perch type group. And I think it makes a lot more sense, you know, to base that decision off of what I see the fish spitting up, what I see swimming around, you know, just the general sense that I'm getting just by reading the water and paying attention when I'm fishing and looking over the side of the boat, you know, just trying to make mental notes of what's going on in my surroundings. Um, I think absolutely do believe that you can build starting points and create objectives for your practices and going out there and making decisions. But I think the most productive outcomes come from the organic decision making that's based off of observation and just paying attention to what's going around you. If it's birds, if it's, you know, seeing crawfish carcasses on the bank, if it's opening a fish's mouth and seeing that they've got a, you know, a tail of a perch in there or whatever it is, those organic type observations are the ones that really catch the giants. You know, if you know that they're on craw even, but there's a specific color of craw that you see them spitting up, that's huge too. Those little subtle details can make huge differences. Absolutely, 100%. That's the gold mine perspective to take on in order to really capitalize on those opportunities. Another color that I really throw in that perch family that's, you know, for more of a clear water in an overcast type situation is like a kind of a dark color patterned sunfish bait. This one I got from Academy a while back ago, and it was just I murdered them on this post spawn when there was still a lot of you know, sunfish and stuff in the backs of the creeks that the fish were kind of keying in on after the bedding phase and whatnot. That's heavily talked about. You can see it in many different FLW magazine articles. It's all about that post-spawn sunfish bite, and this is an absolute killer. It's got a lot of subtle details in it, but it's also dark, and it has a little bit of banding, so it shows up well in overcast conditions. It's one of my favorites. I like how small it is. It's got a great profile, and just the way that this bait is shaped, the action is incredible. And then finally, I have, you know, my shad type color baits. I've got a couple different ones. They're pretty similar, honestly. This is one by H2O, Academy's brand. I like the yellow head. I think in that slightly clear or dirtier water, that yellow head gives them something to key in on. And when they're taking the bait from the head of the bait, when they're taking the bait from the head of the bait, I guess, it's a better hookup ratio, and it's just giving them a target to hone in onto, really to catch fish that are kind of, you know, finicky, swatting at a bait. It gives them a target. I think it's very helpful in that off-colored water. And then of course there's a new bait that I bought that's super similar. I think it's a Sixth Sense. Yeah, it's a Sixth Sense bait. Boom. And this one's very, very close, but I will go to this, you know, while they look almost identical, I'll switch to this one when it's a little less stingy water and I feel like the bite is more subtle, and I just want, and I mean subtle as far as not necessarily them, you know, swatting the bait, but a situation where they're getting a better look at the bait and I need to do something that blends in more naturally, versus this one where I'm giving them a visual target, you know, in off-colored water. This one's just more of a natural mimicry, you know, for just kind of a clear water type situation. So these two are my absolute go-to choices for shad, you know, mimicking baits. Of course, I could do a solid white, you know, like a pearl white. I think that would have the same effect as this would, you know, in terms of getting their attention. But that's just kind of the theory and the logic behind the decisions that I make. I think it's about the subtle details, you know, just kind of rehashing what I've already discussed. The subtle details, paying attention, looking over the side of the boat, seeing what's swimming around. Are the fish feeding up? Are they schooling actively? Are they more positioned in the rocks where you're more likely to find crawfish? What color are the crawfish? what size of the bait that's swimming around. If there's clouds of bait, why would you throw a big fluke if, for example, if there's a whole bunch of smaller type bait swimming around? Maybe pick up a spinner bait with blades that are about that size. Just really thinking about those subtle details that separate you from the conventional weekend angler who doesn't have the knowledge base that you might have, and it gives you a much better chance in a lake where you're releasing populations of fish and they're learning and they're adapting. So those big ones didn't get big for no reason. They're experienced and they're wise to what we're doing. So hopefully that helps. I think that's a great starting point for making your decisions as far as color is concerned. The type of profile that I would throw on, with the Squarebill, everything pretty much is 12 to 15 pound test. If it's super heavy cover, maybe I'll go to 17, but it affects the buoyancy of the bait, how far I can get it down, the float up rate, different properties of the bait that make it special. So I try to stay around that 12 to 15 pound range, generally speaking. So hope that helps. Thanks again, and hopefully you learned something.